Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, despite having already made a couple of videos about Circle of Hands Adventure 3 and still needing to make another one called What Were You Thinking? About the interactions or the motivations of the non-player characters or what I was thinking during the game itself, I want to talk about tripwires because I have the dubious honor of being the game master that's had the first tripwire actually get tripped over and triggered in our game. We've agreed to run at least 6 sessions, each GM running 2 of them sequentially. So Anthony's run his 2, I've run 1. I got 1 more to run, and then Eloy's going to run 2, and then we'll see if we're going to repeat the cycle again. I hope we do. But I want to talk about tripwires, the experience of having that one tripped over, talk about what they are, and then talk about another time I used a tripwire and actually called it that. What the hell are tripwires anyway? All a tripwire is an if-then statement in your preparation of a game, of a scenario as a game master. In Circle of Hands, it has some specific parameters around it. In terms of if it gets triggered or not, what will happen in the bigger picture of the campaign world, which I may get to just a little bit, but it's not incredibly relevant to this. But I want to give an example of using a tripwire and calling it a tripwire in another game as well. But this is a technique that I think a lot of us do anyway. In fact, the techniques that Ron talks about in Circle of Hands and in Sorcerer, some other games, things like tripwires and crosses and bangs and bombs and weaves, these are things that a lot of us tend to do anyway. They're techniques that we use when we run games, but to me, I think it's really cool to actually give them names so we know what we're talking about, so we can kind of analyze what we're doing and talk about it a little bit more intelligently. So a tripwire is simply an if-then statement. It's not to be confused with something you've planned as a game master. This is not a linear sequence of events that's going to happen. There's no story, there's no plot. It's just something that I've done for a long time. That's just logical, If somebody kills John Wick's dog, well, we know what's going to happen. That would be a tripwire, and then all hell breaks loose. Specifically in Circle of Hands, it's an if-then statement that can result, due to the interactions of play, that will really ramp up and escalate the situation. It's not a necessity that you trip over them, but it can be really fun when it happens. And reading from the text itself, he says a tripwire is a specific event with a loud, shocking, uncompromising consequence. If play triggers a tripwire, then the inherent tension in that component, whatever it currently looks like in play, boils over into more explicit, uncompromising form. The effect is simply a drastic and striking change in the situation. Boom. You've tripped over something, but it's not something that the game master just throws in there like a bang. It is quite literally something in the environment that the players, through the interactions of the player characters, could actually get tripped. In the discussion that Anthony had with Ron, there's actually a video, I think, on Ron's channel. There's another video on Anthony's channel talking about tripwires. I like to think of it almost as like billiards, where it could be that you, as the player character, you're the cue ball and you whack that 3, and the 3, goes into the pocket, and you've actually, directly tripped over that tripwire. However, just as likely, you can hit the the 6 with that cue ball, and that goes careening into the 3 and knocks it into the pocket. You might not have tripped over the tripwire yourself, but you did something that influenced the environment, which then caused the tripwire to get triggered, if you will. It's like Ron says, a tripwire and its effects are prepared, not planned. It may or may not be triggered, but completely left up to the events of play. I'm going to give you the examples of the tripwires I had in my venture in a second, and then talk about the one that actually got tripped, as well as talking about one that got tripped in another game. And Ron talks about this, about tripwires in another spot here. He says, having one or more tripwires in your preparation is wonderfully empowering in terms of what might happen, and counterintuitively, not requiring you as a GM to force it to happen. You don't need to steer towards or away from them, and you don't have to play hot and cold with the players. Do the tripwires have to happen? Nope. And if they happen, does it matter when? Nope. Do the players know about them? Nope. Do you know what the post-tripwire fights and conflicts will be? Nope. But are they great fun when they happen? They sure are. And if something else happens that's, near or totally near, nowhere near a tripwire and happens, and there's something big and flashy that happens, that's okay too. They're just things that are in the environment that, there's these if-then statements. Anthony makes this good point as well that, you don't want to put them exactly in the path of the players, at least in Circle of Hands, because you don't want to guarantee, once again, like Ron had said, you don't want to push towards them, or like any reasonable person would do this regardless. You're not really sure if this is going to happen or not. but there's something that can kick the action up a notch. And also, in Circle of Hands, if all the tripwires get tripped over, then things go badly for the young king and roll okay. As long as you have one tripwire left standing, things go okay. It doesn't matter how crazy things go. In fact, in our first 2 ventures, things went horribly. Awful things happened. Many people died. We created an Emborian zone, but somehow things went okay for the young king and roll okay because we didn't trip over all the tripwires. In fact, we didn't trip over any. We got close to some, but we didn't trip over them. So let me actually talk about what really happened in the game. But I want to give you one example first, if you're still with me, from my old Lamentations in Prussia game, which is a short-lived game but just has tons of wonderful things that happen in it. I had read Circle of Hands. I'd used things like tripwires for a long time but didn't really give them a name and didn't think about them in those concrete fashions. And I decided in Lamentations in Prussia I was going to put something that was going to be a tripwire. Wasn't sure what was going to happen or not. And so, when the players pass this village of Lebenwald, which every once in a while goes forward in time and appears just as it used to be, usually during some snowstorm or what have you, they go into the village. They interact with those people that have been dead for years. They simply don't know this. They go into the next town, and they mention it. I didn't really care whether they mentioned it or not, but I knew there was going to be a tripwire should they go back to Lebenwald, because if somebody were to go back to Lebenwald, they would find it as it is now, or then. Completely abandoned, destroyed. It had been all the demonic influences in that area. Everybody had been killed, and some rituals that were performed by Christian sorcerers, Catholics and Protestant alike, and they set up wards around the place to keep the demonic influences in, and from spilling over into Prussia and Germany. And they performed some kind of ritual. And so I decided I was going to put a ring of wards around the village, and we do 12 of them, and should at least 3 of them be destroyed, uprooted, pushed over, then that would result in the releasing of these demons in no short order. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to put a little hook here. I'm not going to make it, guarantee that anybody disturbs these, but I kind of had this little poke at Jason's character, Jürgen, the zealot priest of Zod. So I made them rusty iron crosses. Of course, that makes sense. They were, Christian people that were getting rid of demons. Now, of course, Jason's characters hated Christianity. So they went back there. He saw one of these wards, pushed it down, discovered there were 12 around the village, pushed every single one down. The tripwire was stripped, and hilarity ensued. The demons were released. In fact, I even had a cross occur because I was playing another short-lived game with Lamentations in London, and one of those demons actually made it all the way to London, and more hilarity ensued, and that affected that campaign. But I digress. So you can use tripwires in just about anything. But let's talk about, if you're still with me, our actual Circle of Hands game that just happened. So I had 3 tripwires I talked about in my venture preparation. The first one for component 1 was, if anybody should try to move the Pen and Theory artifact from its location or insist that it be taken from the community, the devoted, at least half the population, will try to prevent this with brutal, murderous rage. It wasn't super likely that somebody was going to do that, but it's something. It's one of the possibilities that could have occurred to the Circle Knights. So it made some sense, but it wasn't, wasn't something that was absolutely going to happen. Second one is if Rhinewend, the brewer, the guy that kind of owns or uses this Racker, Gort, as a sort of servant or slave, if Rhinewend is harmed or killed at the hands of another, Gort will go nuts. Just go bananas. Once again, something that was not 100% likely, but could happen because he was very abusive to this beast, and this is something that somebody could object to. They want to hurt him. Just once again, it was something that it was a possibility that somebody might do that. Last tripwire. If the citizenry of the village discover that Friedman, the leader of the gentry, has been in collusion with the Eye, the demon, they will riot and kill all of the gentry, burning the longhouse down, and will, kill anybody else or attempt to kill anybody else that they seems like would have been in collusion with them. That's a tripwire that got tripped over. And it got tripped over at the very end of the session. It was one of those things that I just kind of watched with a little bit of glee. This is telling me that I need to hurry up. A little bit of glee. But I didn't really care either way. It was just like, I think they're going to blunder right into the tripwire. Because what happened? They, spoiler, they ended up objecting very much to the Rabaja interference. They killed the Eye, and then they pretty much executed Friedman. And they decided, And that would have been a place you could just end the venture right there, but they decided what they wanted to do was they wanted to talk to the village and explain to them what had happened, what had been going on, and so spells were cast upon Hadrick to make him much more appealing to the people, and he, very eloquently explained to the population what had been going on, that their gentry had been in some collusion, that they had been collusion with Spur and Urbaja influence and what have you. A gripping, a moving speech, very appropriate, something that you need to tell the people what has happened here. And all the citizenry, besides the gentry, riot. They kill the rest of the gentry, the relatives of this man. They burn the longhouse down. The witch had long since flown the coop, so they really didn't go after her. She was gone. And the Circle Knights themselves got saved from looking like they were really in collusion, because they were the ones that had, killed him and brought this to everybody's attention. They could have gone down a bunch of different ways. And, like Ron says, does it matter when they happened? No. This brought a situation to a head, but at that point, the adventure was pretty much over. And it seemed like a very fitting way to kind of bring the curtain down as the pitchforks and torches came out and people destroyed everything related to the gentry in this village. And the one thing that we did not do was talk about how the situation went well for the young king and Rolke. So taking the time to do this now, I think to myself, well, the word has spread that the Circle Knights, at least in Lower Temerion, are this force for good and for rooting and ferreting out Urbaja influence. And the news of this has spread far enough that this has caused more support for the young king and Rolke, some more goodwill. And in fact, the brewer has turned his efforts and is now trading more with the people in Temerion themselves. The gentry from the surrounding area of Temerion have moved in and kind of rebuilt this community, giving them some more, some leaders they can trust a little bit more, and the things have just gone well for the young king and Rolke. People look back and remember this as a time when the Circle came and they brought about change for good. It's a good PR. But yeah, Tripwire's really, really interesting, and it was really fun to kind of watch them skirt really close to this, thinking, maybe they're not going to do it, and then really just blow right over it. Fantastic stuff. But do they have to be tripped over? No. They're just an if-then statement in any game to make us a little bit more global. Which, once again, it's not to be confused with preparation of things that are going to happen. It's not to be confused with pushing people towards, like, just go over this and putting it right in their way. It's a logical escalation of events that could happen based upon the interactions of the player characters with the other people in the environment. The player characters themselves could be the ones that trip over it, or through that interaction, like that billiards example, they could push somebody else over it. It doesn't really matter. I think the important thing, though, is that these things would probably not be tripped over had the player characters not entered into the scene and interacted with it. Anyhow, that's it, kids. Have a good one.